The joke that made me lose my husband. I am not proud of this. I don't even know how to start this because I obviously have no right way of putting this. But, you see, it was a joke. Well, I thought it was, but he obviously didn't think so. And that eventually led to me losing everything I've worked so hard for. So let me go and tell you guys about it all. The joke that made me lose my husband, I am not proud of this because it turned out to be an expensive joke. A very expensive one at that. Hello Reddit, my name is Shimmer, and I'm 26 years old, and I am a model. Was a model. As you must have guessed from my name, my mother loved anything that glistened and shined, which eventually led to my father's bankruptcy, and me eventually having to pay them all off. Well, you see, my mother had been born into a very wealthy family and was the only child, so she was spoiled beyond comprehension. Anything she wanted was hers for the taking, and she took advantage of that fact a lot to taunt people around her. Her father had had some issues with his company. He had taken out a loan to invest enough capital into a business, which eventually failed, and that made him fall into loads of debt, which automatically meant he couldn't sponsor my mother's luxurious lifestyle anymore. He died under the pressure of the debts he had to pay back, and everything that he owned when he was alive was seized to make up for his debts. My mother could not bear having to live as a poor girl, so she seduced my father, who at that time was much older than her by 22 years. She got pregnant, and he, my father, who was widowed with 2 sons, had no choice but to marry her. He paid off the rest of the debts my grandfather left behind, and he continued to sponsor my mother's luxurious lifestyle, and this continued until he went bankrupt. His 2 sons, my stepbrothers, who are way older than me because of how many years had passed since their own mother died before my father remarried my mom. You get the gist. Refused to have anything to do with paying back my father's debts because they knew that the debts were acquired from having to support my mother's lifestyle. Growing up with my mother had always been pretty exhausting because she wanted me to dress in a certain type of way, eat in an elegant manner, and in fact, everything I did was supposed to show how well elegant I was brought up. I was a fat baby when I was growing up, and that displeased my mother, who wanted a thin and sexy, beautiful child, so she would feed me less and say she was helping me reduce weight. I got so used to it that if I ate more, I would throw up. My mother was the one who decided she wanted me to be a model. It was originally her dream, but because she was considered too slim, she didn't get the chance. So she was prepared to make sure I got the chance she missed. Ever since I was able to speak perfect English and walk without stumbling, I've been learning how to model. In fact, my mother would pay off some people so I could appear on screen advertising for something, even as a child. All my life, I grew up living my mother's dream, which was infiltrated into mine. When my father went bankrupt and could not sponsor my mother's lifestyle again, she shipped me off to live with her cousin, Raya. She was just the sweetest person to me and treated me for once like I wasn't an object under scrutiny. She gave me a choice of what I wanted to eat or not. She would let me choose my dress and would allow me to suggest the style I wanted my hair to be braided in. I loved living with her so much that I never wanted to leave, but eventually my father died and I was summoned home for his burial. I didn't even cry much because of my dramatic mother who kept running towards the grave dug, and the coffin being passed into it and flinging herself over it, asking they bury her with my father. I knew it was all a facade so people would think she loved him very much, despite the age differences between them. Another reason I didn't cry was because my father and I weren't close. We didn't share that father and daughter's bond every one of my classmates in school seemed to have with their own father. He was mostly after pleasing my mother and never paid much attention to me. In fact, whenever he was around, I ensured I was not available or anywhere near wherever he was at that moment. After my father's burial, the next day, Mom had called me and stated how displeased she was about the extra fat I've put on since I went to her cousin. She complained bitterly and forced me to start training and starving because, according to her, I was the next family food ticket, so I had to be good enough. Even as an underage, because of my shape and tallness, which was the only thing I got from my dad, I was modeling for a lot of things, both for teenagers and even adults. My mother was my manager. She screened everyone I met and everything I did. I didn't have any friends. Let me rephrase this. I wasn't allowed to have friends because, according to my mother, they were just mere distractions, and she didn't want me distracted. I didn't even get to soil my dress and be scolded lovingly by my mother. All I received were lectures on how perfect I should be and how I couldn't make any mistakes of any sort. As young as I was modeling lingerie for stores, and they sold lots because of me. I was young, flashy, and I had fine skin and legs that go on and on. Oh, I was bullied because of my looks in school. Funny, right? Because you'd expect that an ugly person or a nerd would be bullied in school, not a girl being bullied because she was a model. One time a classmate, Chloe, had called me names in school, and I had been so upset. I told my mother once I was back home, and she shrugged her shoulders and told me that I would probably hear worse things than that, and that I should toughen up because once I did, then no one would be able to break my skin again. And I did as she asked me. I toughened up, became the girl that my mother wanted me to be, perfect and beautiful and flawless too. Chloe's words, or anyone else's for that matter, didn't mean anything to me anymore. I was Shimmer, and then I got a contract with the biggest modeling agency, the one my mother had always wanted to work with. My mother had been more excited than I was about the whole thing. I was happy, of course, but only because she was happy. One time, I went for an interview for a modeling job, and the director in charge had offered to have sex with me in exchange for the job. I had been so horrified I had slapped him hard across the face and walked out. When I got home and told my mother, the reaction I expected from her wasn't what I got. She had screamed, shouting at me and asking me why I had refused, since it was just a one-time thing and I had lost that chance to someone else. Honestly, I had been so shocked by what my mother had said, but ignored it and continued schooling and going for modeling jobs. One day, I decided to come home earlier than usual from school because I was feeling sick, and I remember the school nurse phoning to inform my mom about my illness. But my mom hadn't picked any of the calls, and the school nurse eventually had to let me go home because of how I was feeling. When I got home, I was hearing moaning sounds, and surprised, I followed the sound to my mother's room, only to find her in bed with my eldest stepbrother, Dan. I was so shocked and gasped loudly, but of course they were too involved in each other to even notice me. When I confronted my mother about her affair, she shrugged it off as nothing, and casually told me that her husband was dead and she was still young, so why not a young man to warm her bed, especially since he was family too. I was disgusted by her thoughts and actions. Even now, I wonder what caused Father's quick death, if not her cheating. I never got the answer, though. After the incident of my mother and Dan, I worked harder than ever before, so I could go to college and leave from under the woman's wicked clutches. After high school, I gained admission to study music. I didn't particularly like music that much, but my agent suggested it so I could also get familiar with that, because they wanted me to start acting in films too. I didn't object because I just wanted anything except staying with my mom. During my college days also, I modeled as a side gig to get money to pay my bills. Before long, I found it was much easier to exploit men for their money. Men, both young and old, flocked around me because of my beauty, so it was quite easy living the luxurious lifestyle that my mother taught me. All the years I spent in college, I didn't visit my mother, not even once. I didn't want her to know that I was living the exact same lifestyle I hated her for. So I stayed back in school, and whenever there were holidays, I would hang out in clubs. One time, I even started dancing at the famous club. No one knew me though, because of the loads of makeup I would use to cover up my real face, and also I wore a mask on my face whenever I was dancing. I know what you're all thinking, but I didn't sleep with any man at the club. Well, except one, Marvel. Marvel was my first boyfriend. He was the one who introduced me to that club because he worked there as their manager, and when he realized I could dance, he had convinced me to dance for fun. I didn't know he was collecting money from those men who watched me dance. I just felt I was dancing for fun. Well, that was until Marvel started telling me to strip a little for the men who came to watch me, just to tease them for fun. At first I found it strange, but I wanted to please Marvel so much that I did what he asked me. But eventually he wanted me to start revealing my face and stripping nearly every piece of clothing. I refused, of course, and he ended things between us. I was happy he did, because if I had continued that lifestyle, my day job as a model would have ended before it even began. I concentrated on modeling and my course in music. I stopped even collecting money from men for the fun of it, because I realized that I was becoming my mother through and through. Did I mention that not once did she call when I was in college to check up on me? She never rang me to see how I was doing or how I was managing my job and school. My mother was a selfish woman, and I didn't want to end up like her. When I finished college, I got a major big deal to model for an international company. I was also given an all-expenses-paid trip to their headquarters in another state so I could understand clearly the product I was modeling for. I was super excited and packed my bags and went on the trip. It was there I met Austin.
No.
Austin happened to be the owner of the international company I was modeling for, and though he was way older than me, I was happy he took an interest in me. Austin was originally 11 years older than me, but that clearly didn't make any difference when I fell in love with him and married him. At first, I hadn't had any feelings for Austin, but he was so easy to love that I was already neck deep before I realized. He was sweet and gentle, and he knew how to make good conversations. We spoke for hours at length most times, and even if we had nothing to say, he would come up with something that would eventually lead to us talking an extra hour or two. Despite being very, very rich, he was very humble, and it was clear that all his workers clearly adored him. When Austin asked me to be his girlfriend, I was super excited and said yes almost immediately. We started dating, and within 2 months of dating, we got married. Yes, our relationship was short, but we both knew what we wanted, and as Austin would say, I never waste time with something I know is for me, and that's what makes me a very rich businessman. It was true, though. Austin was one man that I knew had very sharp instincts, and whenever he listened to them, he always ended up being right about any situation, work or personal. When we got married, guess who was more excited than I was? My mother. She thought that my husband would sponsor her luxurious lifestyle like her father did, and ended up ruining himself and her husband too. My own father ended up the same way. I wasn't going to let her do that to my husband, so I refused to invite her for the wedding as anything other than an acquaintance. She, of course, was pissed, but I didn't mind. I was done playing her little games and being used as a pawn or bait to get whatever she wanted. Luckily for her, Austin managed to convince me not to abandon her, so we placed her on a strict monthly allowance. It pissed her off because she was used to having unlimited access to money, but I couldn't care less. I was happy being married to Austin because I loved him and he loved me too. I didn't stop working as a model though, not because of the money, but because I loved being a model. Austin was very supportive of my work and would even employ me to work with his company from time to time, and whenever I refused payment, he would insist it was for the job I did and pay me. He treated me nicely and made sure, despite his busy schedules, he had time for me, and I loved that about him. One time I had to work in another city, and he was very busy, so I couldn't inform him about it. I went alone, and after settling in and starting the photography sessions, I saw him with the media crew waiting for me. I was so happy and proud that my husband supported my job so much, he would make time for me. All through our first 2 years of being married, we had no fights. Not that we didn't, but it was nothing too big that we couldn't sort before going to bed that night. Well, our 3rd year of being married, I was called home by my stepbrother Ben, who was the only one I did speak to. After the incident of seeing my mom and Dan together, I never spoke to him after that, and ever since I got married, my mom too had joined the list of people I didn't speak to. She tried several times to get a hold of me, would travel down to my house, but I would inform the security not to let her in. I didn't want to see or talk to her at all. Ben told me she, my mother, had died in a car accident. She had been drunk and had a head-on collision with a truck carrying wood, so she had died almost instantly. I went home to fulfill my duties as her only child, but Austin couldn't go with me because he had meetings lined up that he couldn't walk away from. So I went alone and arranged her burial ceremony. Funnily, many people turned up and had a lot of good things to say about her. I knew it was all a charade. They just wanted to come see me, whether or not I turned out like my mother. Only a few of them knew I was married to Austin, a multi-billionaire. I discharged everyone as quickly as I could because I had been exhausted from having to pretend to be a daughter who cared about her mother. The person I saw last was the most shocking to me. It was Chloe, and she was looking like she had swallowed a ball, and a man, a very handsome man, had been holding her hand as she walked towards me to offer her obviously fake condolences. I had prepared to give her a cold remark to whatever she said, since I knew what she was there for when she walked towards me with a genuine smile. By that time, the young gentleman had released her hand and gone in search of someone in the room after offering me his condolences. She smiled again after he left and rubbed her stomach, offering me her condolences, to which I just smiled falsely and said thank you. The crazy thing was, she started chatting with me like we were old friends and telling me that she was 6 months gone and couldn't even wait for the baby to come, and also so she could have her wedding in September and fit in her wedding dress. She also told me that she started working as a school teacher in our old high school and that her boyfriend was a model but hadn't gotten good gigs recently, so things had been tight, especially with the baby coming. All I heard from all her gibberish at the time was her not being married to the handsome guy, who I later found out his name was Harris, and that he was a model. It was the perfect time to make Chloe pay for what she did in high school, so I smiled and offered to pitch in for Harris for a job. She had been so happy not knowing I had a plan. My original plan had been employing Harris, and taking him far away from Chloe would be a big punishment for what she did to me in high school, or keep him so busy he would barely have time for her. So I got him loads of modeling jobs in which I was the manager. I told Austin that I had business to settle, so I had to stay back a while, and he reluctantly agreed because he couldn't come because of work. I ensured I worked Harris to the bone, and he was pretty exhausted by the end of the day. Whether the picture was fine or not, I had him pose over hundreds of times again, and eventually choose the ones he had done before. One time, Chloe had come to see me and asked if I could reduce the workload of Harris because he never had time for her again, and with the baby coming, she was stressed and all. I gently reminded her she asked me to give him a chance and told her that Harris wasn't the best out there, that I only started the project because I accepted her request since we were old-time friends. Chloe had agreed and left my place looking like a swollen bag of potatoes. I remember being so happy seeing her like that, and I had even toasted to the air with my most expensive wine. I continued making Harris pay for Chloe's sins, and I guessed he must have noticed because he came to me one time and asked why I'd been so hard on him and treated him poorly. I had been so caught up in my revenge that another human was suffering for it. I apologized, and he asked if he could join me for dinner as a truce. I agreed and ordered us food to eat since I couldn't cook, but Harris had asked that I cancel the order and he would cook. I had been very surprised as to how a man would know his way around the kitchen, but he did. Harris was really good with the knives and everything else. Before an hour, dinner was ready and it was very delicious. We talked for a while and I found out that we had similar interests, so the conversation between us flowed easily. When it was time for him to leave, he offered to cook me another delicious homemade meal the next day, and I agreed. I didn't even know I was falling into a trap. He came the next day around dinner time and whipped up something good again. We ended up talking way past curfew, and he ended up sleeping at my house. I know what you're all thinking, but we didn't sleep together. He slept in a different room and a different bed. It became a routine, Harris coming over to my place, cooking me dinner, and us having conversations about things we normally or usually don't discuss with other people. He even told me once that he had come here for a side gig, and he had met Chloe. And because she knew he was going to leave, she had purposely gotten pregnant, and that had led to him staying there fully. I had also confided in him about the real reason I had employed him, about Chloe's bullying and the revenge I had in mind. One evening, per usual, we had dinner, talked, and I received a text message from my husband that he was going to call me on video call in 10 minutes, and he was teasing me, telling me to wear something sexy. I had to let Harris leave because I didn't want Austin asking questions. So I told him I had to do something important and would see him the next day. Well, I opened the door, and when he was outside waving goodbye, he grabbed the door handle to stop me from pushing it to lock and kissed me. I was surprised and couldn't react, but the ringtone of my phone jolted me into action and I pushed him away, then locked the door. I was so shocked, and throughout my video call with my husband, I was very distracted as my thoughts kept swaying to the kiss. Austin even noticed I was distracted and did ask me. I lied that it was work-related. We spoke for another 25 minutes before Austin said goodnight. After that, I couldn't sleep. I was thinking about the kiss and asking myself different questions as to why Harris would have kissed me when he knew I was married and that he had a baby coming with his girlfriend. The next day, I avoided him as much as I could. In fact, I didn't even complain about the shoots. Just wanted to stay as far away from him as possible. I didn't want to have to cheat on my husband, because I did love Austin. Harris came over that evening, and I told him I had already ordered pizza and wasn't hungry and wanted to rest. He left, accepting my excuses. I avoided Harris for a whole week. It wasn't easy, as we literally worked together, and he was trying his hardest to get my attention. And also, my feelings were all over the place, as since the kiss, I started to view him in another light. Started to take notice of his abs and his smile that lit his entire face. One time he had been doing a water advertisement, and he was drinking water, making sure the water was dripping down his jaw to his chest. My throat had been so parched, I felt I could lick off the water on his chest and be satisfied. I snapped out of it and left early that day, trusting another person with the work. I thought it was because I was sexually frustrated, and at that point, I hated that Austin wasn't with me there, because if I had my husband by my side, maybe I wouldn't be lusting after another man. One night I was mugged. They made away with all the money and jewelry I had. I wasn't bothered about the amount of money they took, and neither did the jewelry bother me because I could replace them all if I wanted to. But I was very scared to stay in the house alone, because when they had come in at first, one of them had hit me on the head with the edge of the gun in his hand, and I had fainted. By the time I was awake, they had already left. I called Austin, but it was his secretary who picked up, and she told me how caught up with work he was. I told her to tell him I said hi instead of saying what I wanted to say. I didn't want to disturb him anymore because I knew he would probably abandon work and come running to me, and that would mean losing a significant amount of money. So I called the closest person to me around, and it was Harris. He came running and told me how worried he was when he got my call. I hugged him tightly, scared, and asked if Chloe was aware he was with me, and he answered with a no, that she slept deeply. He stayed with me at home throughout the night, and by the time it was morning, his phone was blowing up with calls from Chloe. He picked up the call and lied that he had to run an errand in town, and he left early so he didn't wake her up and start panicking that he was leaving that early. Even to me, the story he made up sounded pathetic, but Chloe seemed to believe him and wished him a safe trip before dropping the call. I couldn't believe he lied to the mother of his unborn child because of me, and that touched me so much because, apart from my husband, no one had ever stood up for me, and he was doing that. In my head, it felt like he was standing up for me, which obviously wasn't the case, but I at that point was clearly not listening to my brain, but my heart, as I had pulled his face into my palm and kissed him. Well, the rest is, you can probably guess. We slept together that day. After that day, I felt so guilty because I had cheated on my husband, and I still loved Austin very much. Harris confronted me when he realized I had been avoiding him again, and I gave him some excuses which he didn't buy. Eventually, we had sex again. We continued our affair. Harris was so addicting. He just had a way with his hands that made me consider Austin as though a good husband, but not good enough when it came to satisfying a woman. Chloe didn't suspect a thing, and thought of me as her good friend and was always telling me anything, sometimes about the baby or about Harris. I started getting jealous whenever she told me Harris bought her a few things because it's my money originally, and I pay Harris for working with me, and some extra tips I gave him whenever he had money issues. Harris never bought me anything. I didn't mind at first because I could buy myself anything I wanted, but it began to bother me when Chloe would tell me Harris bought her gifts every time he came home. I knew I had no right to be jealous, but I couldn't help feeling that way. I started insisting Harris spent more than a few hours with me, so most times he was always at my place. That was until Austin came around. Austin had rounded up his business and suspended everything else to come be with me. I was happy to see Austin because he had come to where we were shooting. Harris and I as a couple for a couple sets of clothing. I was so surprised to see him, and he had hugged and kissed me right there in front of everyone. And I saw out of the corner of my eye that Harris had been jealous. Throughout the remaining photo sessions, Austin was there, and whenever I had a break, he was right beside me, giving me water or wiping off the sweat that had gathered from all the lights from the photography equipment. Harris kept to himself throughout, clearly not pleased with the whole situation. Before I had any chance to see Harris again was another week, and that was because Austin made sure he didn't leave my side. Not that I didn't exactly see him, but I couldn't talk to him privately because Austin was around, and we couldn't hang out at my place like we did before. So I arranged a celebration party for my team, including the models. Austin wanted to come along, but I dissuaded him, saying it was only for the team, and besides, everyone would feel intimidated if I brought my husband, when I specifically said it was for the team alone, and he had reluctantly agreed. When the team had gathered, I made sure everyone had plenty to drink and eat. Harris barely touched his food or drink, and just looked like he was desperate to leave the place. When I was sure everyone was tipsy, some already very drunk, I made my move. I sent him a text to meet me in the bathroom, and he should leave in about 2 minutes after I'd left the table. I waited impatiently for him, and when he eventually did show up, I apologized for the previous week and us not seeing each other, and he, clearly jealous, just told me he didn't like how Austin kept touching and kissing me like I was his property, and I had laughed and jokingly said I indeed was, but Harris had just become more mad, and I had calmed him down. We kissed and made up before I left the bathroom, and he also left a few minutes after I had already left too. Don't get me wrong, I loved my husband Austin very much, but I liked Harris, especially because he was better at sex than Austin was. I regret it now, but at that time, I was not thinking clearly and just wanted it all. Austin's deep pockets and his love and Harris for his sexual prowess. Well, I guess no secrets can be kept for that long, as mine was also actually discovered. Or should I say had been discovered way long before I knew it would be, well, apparently by the last guy that I would never have thought of. Jason was the guy who drove me around. He was mostly silent, just always watching people around, and I had always dismissed him as an ordinary guy and paid him no attention. But apparently he had been hired by my husband to protect me and report back to him any unusual thing he noticed around me or about me, and I didn't even know that. And apparently, to be able to drive me home, Jason had sat at another table and ordered drinks, but didn't touch them, and had noticed Harris following me into the bathroom, and he had followed us and recorded our conversation. And apparently he had been reporting to his boss about the occasional visits from Harris and the occasional sleepovers he's been having too. I guess the record he made of us actually sealed the whole thing for Austin, and he confronted me about it. I had been shocked at first, then laughed and covered it up with a joke that I was actually joking with Harris that night. Funny thing is, Austin believed me, but I had just been so nervous and couldn't keep my mouth shut. I was in my head trying to cover loose ends, and I had jokingly said that if perhaps I did cheat on him with Harris, it would be because Harris was younger and his sexual prowess would be applause-worthy. I was only joking about it, but Austin had just looked at me and then left. I tried calling and texting him, but he wouldn't respond to either one. The next thing that was mailed to me was a sealed document, and when I opened it, it was a divorce paper, and it had already been signed by one party, Austin. I tried so hard to reach out, but traveling seemed impossible as my cards had been blocked, so I had no access to my account anymore, or let me say Austin's accounts. Please, I really need your advice, guys. I cannot lose Austin. I love him very much, please.
Update.
Hello, Reddit. It's me again. To say I'm depressed is a total understatement of my feelings right now. I cannot begin to say how much I regret ever cheating on Austin. I'm extremely doomed, and the backlashing comments I receive from my posts just make me feel even worse. I got pregnant for Harris because of our affair, and I don't even have enough money on me to have an abortion. I had to sell my father's house where I stayed before to cater to my needs, and that of the unborn unlucky child, for having a failed mother already. I had to move to a smaller apartment with the money I got, and had to sell my expensive dresses to get cheaper ones that could accommodate my growing belly. Harris moved in with me and Chloe too. Yes, we all live together now, and life has never been more frustrating before. Having to bear the snickers and the barely concealed hatred of Chloe. Even getting by every day seems so hard, and Harris also seems to blame me for every problem he has. They're both feeding off the money I have left with me, but they still blame me for everything that has happened. I feel so horrible for losing the one person that cared about me the most, regardless of my past, and taught me how to turn those hurts into strength. But I clearly was proud enough to think I already got it, and when I came back home, only to fall into some sick, twisted revenge plot that eventually landed me in a worse situation than I have ever been in my life. I regret everything so much, and every day is a reminder of what I could have had but lost due to my reckless behavior. I took for granted what I got not because I was worth it, and now I've lost it and can't get it back. I cannot even put into words efficiently how awful I feel every time of the day. I keep wishing I had never come here, or just left after my mother's burial when I had the chance to. But now, I don't even have the option of leaving. My life is just totally ruined.
Update.
Hello Reddit, this is my last post here, and I just wanted to say, well, thank you for reading my story, and I know how true it is what all your comments say about me. I'm a horrible, horrible person that will forever pay for her sins of losing a good man. I'm in an abyss of my own creating, a hell decorated just for me. Everything tends to remind me of how stupid I was. I feel so scared because my growing belly and the little kicks I feel in my tummy remind me every day that soon enough, I'd be a mother. It scares the daylight out of me because I never had a good mother. And with what I did to Austin, I don't think I have any chances of being even a fairly good mother to my unborn child. Learn from me, guys. Believe me when I tell you that it really never pays to cheat. Thanks and goodbye.